Good morning, everyone. My name is Hamza, and I'm on the team here at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thank you for joining us today for our member workshop hosted by Akkodis and the Collective AI on AI that works for all Canadians. Today, we'll explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we work, govern, and innovate, and more importantly, how Canada can lead this transformation with purpose, inclusion, and impact. We'll be sharing new insights from Akkodis's AI Market Readiness Survey, and our discussion will cover everything from responsible adoption and ethical governance to the future of jobs and upskilling our workforce. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please take a moment to rename yourself in Zoom to your first and last name so we can know who's with us. And throughout the session, feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat. We'll be gathering those for a Q&A period following the workshop. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land at which we are meeting on is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Though you could be joining us or watching from anywhere, the board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. They share with us a sense of responsibility for intergenerational equity, the well-being of today and tomorrow. And now, without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Ta Q, President of Akkodis.
Thank you very much, Hamza, and welcome everyone to our event. So today we're going to be facilitating an event called Code to Community, which is really about AI that works for all Canadians. It's probably going to be one of our most important conversations that we have, and probably one of the largest challenges facing us both professionally and personally as Canadians over the next decade. So once again, my name is Tom. I am the country president for the Adecco group, which consists of Adecco, Akkodis, and Knightsbridge LHH. And I am also the head of Akkodis, the tech and engineering division of the Adecco group. I'm personally very passionate about AI. I am unashamedly an early adopter. Everybody will see with the number of things that I have on my computer. And I'm very excited to be the facilitator of this conversation today. What I'm going to do first, before I introduce the panelists, is to share some data with everyone on the call today. I think before we talk about the subject, it's good to have some grounding information about where we stand today as a country and as a industry in Canada. Before I go into the survey, I think it's important to say that the Adecco group has the tagline of making the future work for everyone. And obviously, embracing AI and integrating both AI and talent is going to be one of the key ways in which we can make that happen. So as a result, the Adecco group had commissioned globally a study which really looked into how AI will be affecting the landscape. So I will be sharing the slide of the study. So the name of the study is called Leading in the Age of AI. This was done a survey across all 13 large OECD countries, where we asked the leaders and C-suite of those countries a whole host of questions and data points around how they're dealing with AI and what is their strategy and what are their major concerns. And of course, in Canada, we were surveyed as well. So in total, the survey size was around 2,000, and of the 2,000 surveyed, Canada had a sample size of 100. So it is a statistically significant sample size, and it shares some very important information. So one of the clearest findings that we found is that from a approach perspective, it's no longer an option to choose between technology or talent. It's really going to be the future based on the successful integration of those two things together. And clearly, as a result of the survey, what we found was that Canada and Canadian organizations is struggling with this. So, only 31% of Canadian organizations surveyed are investing in data insights. So, as we all know, even before you get to AI, one of the first steps to take is to make sure that your data is traction in a way that it can be properly analyzed and leveraged by AI. And today, only 31% of our organizations is ready at that step. So that is a significant area of caution. And we know that the three forces that really will be shaping the future past 2030 is going to be the combination, not of just the large language models, but also of generative AI. So, we call it true AI or generalist AI, digitization, and then a really much more flexible way of working. So how do you integrate the talent and the data and the AI? And yet we're finding that there is a significant lack of AI skills. Of the 100 leaders surveyed, we found that 42% of them are saying that one of the number one challenges is going to be a lack of AI skill sets in Canada. So for many of you guys joining today, that is clearly an avenue for development. And we hear it in every facet of the media today. AI is the future. It is really time to embrace that future. We also see leadership alignment in our organizations as a glowing challenge. 38% of those executives surveyed say that their leadership teams still struggle with actually aligning on a singular AI strategy. Again, very difficult to get an AI strategy moving if you cannot get alignment within your leadership team. Now, that is actually slightly better than the mean from the survey. Even though we were behind a number of areas, it does show that one strength of Canada is we do know how to work well with each other, but that is one area that we need to continue to improve. So I think one of the major weaknesses that we identified, and it's going to be one of the topics that we talk about today, is that Canada is one of the least likely countries to actually have an AI policy. That means that organizationally, having an approach to AI and governance around AI has not been an area of focus. And in fact, if you were to take that data a little bit deeper, 44% of organizations actually today leave it entirely up to the employees in terms of how they use AI at work. A kind of a laissez-faire, hands-off approach. And 51% expect that their workforce will be predominantly and primarily responsible for upscaling their own AI skills, as opposed to an approach driven from a top down. So obviously these points are worth considering, and I'm sure as you're listening to this, you can think about where your organization lies on either side of that 44% or 51% point flip. And we can definitely see that of the OECD countries surveyed, we're dead last in those categories. So I think that's definitely a wake-up call for us. Now, the good news is the data does show a path forward. And the path forward is that we do see that 10% of companies globally are what we would call future ready or future forward. These organizations have really embraced a new leadership mindset. They've invested deeply in skill development. They support career mobility, and they really integrate AI into their operation structures. And they understand the future of work is really going to be an integration of the two. It's going to be a human-centric approach that makes each human much more effective using the power of AI, as opposed to a straight AI replacement approach. So what makes a future-ready organization different, right? So we found that there was kind of 4 clear traits. So one is that future-forward organizations were clearly prepared for a rapidly changing future. I think that's actually quite a big one. Just being ready to change and being willing to change is the first step. If your initial reaction to everything is, I would rather stay the same, it's very difficult to have any major segue. And in an earlier conversation that we were having with the panel, we do find that Canada has a tendency to be a wait and see country, where we kind of wait to see what Europe is doing, what the US is doing before we commit. And clearly in this AI revolution, there is clearly a disadvantage to being a fence sitter, right? So I think we need to commit and we need to move right away. And committing to that skills development is the next stage. It is really going to be vital to utilize the human resources that we have at hand. AI, especially generative AI, has not been around for a very long time. That means the prevalence of that skill set, which again, Canadian leaders have called out as being a barrier, is something that we control ourselves. But that skill set doesn't exist out there in tremendous quantity. It's a skill set that we as leaders have a responsibility for creating ourselves, for upscaling ourselves. So these future forward organizations all have a way of evolving and upscaling their own employees to the next level so that they are AI ready. And that is one of the key differentiators between the two. And the third one is going to be the ability to facilitate career mobility. As the nature of jobs change due to the AI revolution, allowing the people who have had the skills upgraded to then change between positions, between departments, between functions is going to be a key to be able to hold on to that human resource that you've developed and put them in a position to be successful. And finally, they take a very structured way to AI development and also deployment. If there is a clear policy in place and they understand what they're trying to do, what is the outcome they're trying to reach, and then they put the business steps in place for that approach to happen, as opposed to kind of letting your employees decide where you're going to go. So this is our opportunity and our challenge, right? So, Canada, we can make our organizations part of that 10% future-ready organizations. And today in the panel, we're going to hear lots of answers and opinions in terms of how we could potentially make that happen. And finally, just a quick plug. The Adecco Group is going to be producing our global future work report, which is going to be in a 6-year, and it's now going to look at the other side of that equation, which is what can the individual, what can the internal colleague and the internal employee do about developing their career and doing this transformation. So this report will be released on October the 16th as part of this. As part of the package you'll receive, there'll be a QR code, which will allow you to go ahead and download that as well. So I think that brings us to the chat that we're going to have today. We're going to be reimagining leadership. We're going to be building new workforce strategies. We're going to be looking at how to make ourselves more inclusive and future ready, and how to do better collaboration between businesses and government and all the other supporting functions to make AI work for all of us. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panel. So we have on my right, so from my right to my left, we have Jim Hinton. Jim is a leading expert in intellectual property strategy and innovation policy, and he is the founder of Own Innovation and has been a proud supporter of Canadian technology companies. And he is also at the forefront of helping us think about how AI policies are going to be working in a technology world. We have Alex Chan. Alex is the Microsoft Azure Canada National Initiative Spearhead, and he is harnessing the power of Azure to drive innovation and impacting government services across Canada. So he's going to be providing some real insights around how we can empower and adopt AI responsibly, ensuring that inclusion, ethics, and long-term readiness are built into every solution. Then we have from our own company, Megan Wickens, who's the head of SparkAI at the Adecco Group. And she brings deep expertise on how organizations can responsibly integrate AI into their workforce strategies and build inclusive pathways for reskilling and growth. Again, we talked about one of the biggest gaps is that reskilling and skills gap. And definitely, I think at the Adecco Group, that is one area that we have a lot of expertise. And then finally, last but certainly not least, Kim St. George, 20 years experience leading and advising clients through transformation and data-driven innovation. And of course, that's led very smoothly into AI-powered solutions. She is the CIO and head of partnerships at Collective AI, one of the other sponsors of our talk today. And she helps organizations lead and responsibly through strategic enablement and enterprise-wide readiness. So collectively together, I think we will have a chat about how we're going to be able to take on the AI challenge, answer some of the weaknesses that we saw in the survey before us, and where we go from here. So my first question, as I've been talking for a long time, so I can finally quiet, is based on some of the survey results that we shared with you guys ahead of time. Maybe we can just go across the panel to see if there were any specific reactions and gut reactions from you guys right off the bat in terms of how you thought about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and then we can kind of go down the line.
Yeah, great, and happy to be here and happy to have the discussion with the group. And what really jumped out to me was saying Canada's sort of dead last in the OECD on some of these metrics, and it reminds me that Canada is going to be predicted to be the worst performing economy of those OECD countries, as well as for the next 3 generations or 3 decades after that. And so it's pretty grim news, and I think they go hand in hand. If we're not using AI in a thoughtful way and really taking advantage of this wave, owning the technology, building the technology, then we're going to miss out on those productivity gains against our peers. And so we have to really recognize this. And then I think there's an ambition within Canadian technology companies to get there. And then it's the industrial mix that we need to have and really focus on Canadian innovators that are building the technology tools and getting those in. And really data is the innovation asset and how you secure that and data sovereignty and all those things. So I think it really is sort of a time call to action time around artificial intelligence, and Canada's, if we don't change course, then we're going to be in a very bad spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, happy to be here as well. Thank you for the invitation. So from my standpoint, it's while the data suggests that there's a lot that we can do, it's certainly an opportunity. It's an opportunity to also embrace not just AI in the sense of just what you see often in the media and likewise for your interactions from using as a search engine, but actually using it to take information that has previously taken months to years to make sense of within organizations to within minutes and hours. So there's a vast amount of opportunity here, a vast amount of impact can make for people to the processes and technologies. And we certainly have an extensive infrastructure, many organizations do, to actually allow for it to occur, provided it's governed.
Thanks for having me too. I'm super excited to be here to be representing the Adecco group, of course, and very familiar with the research. And I don't want to give too much away because I know we're going to be talking about this, so like spoiler alert. But one of the things that struck me here is, 40+% of leaders in organizations are worried about the skills, AI skills of their employees and their workers. And yet 51% of those organizations in Canada also expect the workers to be upskilling themselves. And so for me, it is critical. It is table stakes now to ensure organizations must ensure that they do have a talent program that sits beside their tech initiatives. So there's a huge disconnect that we're seeing between tech ambition and talent readiness. And I think that this report addresses that. And we're seeing this across the globe. And so really excited to get into that piece around the skilling and workforce readiness.
Thanks for having me. Also very excited to be here. And yeah, I guess gut reaction for me looking at those is really within those ambition and having the talent. Sometimes it's a bit of a time where we freeze in space and we're wondering what to do. So if you're part of those that are still wondering, okay, how do I crack the code and get started with this? There's no better time than right now, and it doesn't have to be big. So start small. There's a plethora of AI productivity tools you can get your hands on, get used to it, start understanding how to work with AI, and the rest can come a little more easily as you're adopting it and figure out how it works within your day-to-day workflow. So don't hesitate. There's a great opportunity ahead of us as Canadian to harness this and take it forward.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim. So I'm going to get started with our first topic today. So I think the first topic we wanted to discuss today is really around data privacy and security, as it pertains to AI. I think one of the most sensitive topics and one of the most largest concerns for the everyday person is, what is the data that's being collected on me today, and how is that data going to be used? Will it be used responsibly by AI? We've all heard about horror stories around how that data can be misappropriated and misused from a technology perspective. And now you add the accelerator of AI on top of it, that could be quite concerning from that perspective. So I've compiled together a list of questions, some received from other leaders and others we really put some thought around as key concerns. And then we wanted to check with our panelists to see if they have, their input on that. So I would say question number one, what are the most significant risks organizations should consider when implementing AI? And how is that different from regular, or not regular, but previous more standard cybersecurity concerns?
Maybe I can take us out of this first. So when we look at actually AI itself, sometimes people are treated very differently, but the reality also is, in most cases, it begins with the security and the governance of your data point blank as an organization. So the challenge that you see when it comes to AI in terms of the risks does begin with a strong data governance strategy. It does begin with who's accessing that information, how much of that is contained within an organization, relative to people, to the statistic of 50% expected to self-learn. People are still going to adopt AI. So it's regulating that, making sure that it resides, and likewise the privacy protections of your property as your IP are all relative to your organization and protected no matter what occurs next.
Yeah, and one of the things is that companies are sort of building these things as they go, and there was federal legislation that was coming in around data and IP and new privacy, but we're really within a governance framework nationally that is still quite a wild west, and so companies themselves have to figure out what is going to be best for them. And so I work with teams to craft these agreements. Who's going to, let's say, control the data? People talk about data ownership, but it's really about control and access, and where is that data going to be stored? How is all of that mix going to be there? And so I think there is some talk again federally about having some legislation, but it is really up to the companies. And like from a privacy perspective, it's like, don't be the slowest one running from the bear. And somebody's going to get caught as long as it's not you, and you stay ahead of it. But that's not enough. People need to be doing a lot more. And if data is your most critical asset, and you recognize that, then it's then prioritizing that and putting the pieces in place to keep that.
Perhaps adding to this is bringing as well a basic AI literacy to your employee base, so they understand the difference of the public domain AI versus a private domain AI, and how information is managed and how models are learning, because they're using it in their private world. So when they're coming, the Sunday to Monday transition needs a bit of a context explanation for them to really harness and understand, okay, this is how information is used. If I put it on the public domain and it's private company information, here are the different risks. So I think basic AI literacy overall will also get a long way in getting people to understand how the different models work and should be handled.
Yeah, I think just like that's a great point, Kim. I think we've all heard those horror stories that when, for instance, an organization or someone has accidentally put a prompt or likewise their proprietary content into a public website, right? It does stipulate that that might be used for training purposes, and it becomes part of that LLM. But there are actually a lot of offerings and services out there that allows you to keep and containerize that information, so that at the end of the day, as employees continue to explore, upskill, and leverage in their day-to-day processes, it's not necessarily about stopping them from doing it. It's about making sure that when they do put in any kind of sensitive company information, you can feel safe that it's not going to leave the premises.
Yeah, and that's one area where when I work with companies, they send me this click wrap, and if you have a good process in place for saying, okay, people want to use AI, but we need to know what we're agreeing to, and sometimes the free ones might have terms that might not be as desirable, and so knowing what you're agreeing to, because there aren't, like I said, there's no guardrails, so there's no, let's say, minimum bar or a data security standard that you have to have, and so as much as people don't like reading those, there needs to be a process for vetting it, and maybe really escalating it, so people on the front line aren't sitting there combing through it. It gets to somebody who can say, yeah, this one makes sense for where we want to keep our data, how we want to sort of put our algorithms and everything from there.
Just tacking onto that, I think something that's really important that a lot of organizations, or at least in my experience, that a lot of organizations are missing, is when AI is being enabled in the solutions they already have. So looking at your existing digital product, your tech stack, and understanding how your vendors, those suppliers, those organizations are embedding AI into their solutions. You don't always know when it's happening. I mean, we've surveyed a bunch of companies and they're like, we don't use AI. You do, and you just don't know it. And so from a data perspective, we're talking about using an external chat GPT versus an internal Copilot as an example, and understanding the differences between there. But what about all of your other digital and tech products that you don't know where AI is a solution has been enriched, and then it's not a free-for-all, it's still within your environment, but it goes back to how is it being used to train those models? Where is that information going? And to Kim's point around AI literacy, it's also a good opportunity for organizations, a garbage in, garbage out. So that's a behavior. That is not an AI skill. It's a good opportunity for organizations to, slow down and say, how do we upskill our workers to have the right behaviors that when AI is deployed in the organization or they're utilizing it through third-party applications, that they're doing it responsibly and the data they're putting in is good data.
Absolutely. So I think the theme of third-party services have come up quite a few times. So just quoting a study from 2024. So already, as we can see, the time is moving very fast in this. But in 2024, IBM did a survey where they found that 67%, or kind of 2/3 of companies using a third-party AI service, said that they had some sort of data compromise, and with the average cost of that compromise in the range of 4.2 million, according to the study. So that's quite a lot of impact. And since there are very few native AI companies or companies developing their own AI services, most companies are using third-party services. So from a leadership perspective or a leadership mindset, what should be the right approach to go and acquire those third-party services? How do you select them? How do you govern them? How do you make sure that you use them correctly?
Technology, so I guess I can give it a shot. I think it begins with the fact that you understand office assurance that your information is not going to be used for the training of the company that the service that's providing that service. Secondly, it's also about the idea that when it comes to models, and I think ultimately the information it's using to train with, you understand ultimately the kind of use cases and the kind of ways in which it should be used. One LLM may not necessarily be the best use case for another one, where, for instance, it may use images. So sometimes when you misplace certain ones, those are some of the basic interactions and skill sets that really helps to elevate how AI can be applied. Tough question.
Yeah, it's a tough question, right? And I think part of it is we're all learning. So and I think that's something that we want to cover in our topic as well. It is a very new topic, it's an evolving topic. Data from the year before is going to be completely different from the year that we're having today, and the year from next year is going to have very different results than this year. So part of it is the agility in dealing with how you go about it. Right. So, as we continue kind of through the conversation, I'm moving more towards kind of the regulatory side from a company perspective. So Deloitte did a survey where they said, 78% of organizations using AI, are finding that due to the fact that the systems span across multiple jurisdictions, they have a lot of challenges in data regulation across multiple jurisdictions. And they have, again, we won't talk about which organizations they are, but 34% of them has had to deal with various different levels of data zoning violations or potential violations as a result of using a language model or some other type of AI. What strategies would you implement to manage data sovereignty, and how you use the AI product in that kind of environment?
Yeah, you know what? I want to take a stab at this first, and I also want to reiterate, even to the previous question, how important it is where when you think about adopting AI as an organization, you're upskilling your staff and people and workforce so that they're also becoming more literate and advanced in concepts like data management, administration of your security, understanding actually how to run that and orchestrate your operations. Those skill sets are becoming especially even more pertinent in this age. And so when we look at those now applying those skill sets towards now adopting this, it fundamentally also sets and assures you some of the basics that you do need when you make those kind of decisions around where AI resides, where those services are. I work with the federal government and likewise the public sector space. And what I can say is there are very strict and secure data requirements from a residency basis to how PI information is processed. One of the ones I'll just throw out there is making sure your people actually have an ability to actually encrypt information so that you know exactly what model, what table, what things are being used by the individual level, and also how much data resides within Canada. So it's about the concept of storage. It's about the idea that when we have sensitive information, organizations feel secure that that information does not leave the border of a country. The processing is especially is still up for debate. but ultimately where that information resides, at least, is one that we have seen a lot of organizations really prioritize.
Yeah, and data residency is really the first step, and then data sovereignty is the next step. And so having that sovereign compute capacity, sovereign data storage, and really what that means is having, from a legal perspective, if you have data that's stored here in Canada, but controlled by an international firm that is governed by the US Cloud Act, the Patriot Act, some of these other things, then under those rules, the data could be accessed. And with the shifting political landscape, what was sort of national security blends into what's economic security. And so having compute capacity, sovereign compute capacity in Canada is critical. We saw late last year, some announcements with around sovereign compute capacity coming on, and then there's some more funding that's coming in from the federal government. So federal funding, federal data, all of the compute capacity that needs to be built, and there's a long road to go there to make that happen. But it is a very critical thing, particularly in this geopolitically charged time that we're in.
I think Jim hit on a great point here, and that's the idea of transparency. Right, it's that if there are any kind of sovereignty kind of challenges, so like Wes, to your point around some of the acts that are occurring from a legal standpoint, each individual country has its own legal mandates, making sure that organizations and providers are transparent with requests that are being made. And as a result, I think from any provider, it's critical that if you do get that kind of request in, that we make it available for consumers and customers. Secondly, I do think this is now less from a legal standpoint, of course, just for the record, but when it comes to sovereignty, what is it, right? Is it physical sovereignty? Is it application people sovereignty? Those are some of the questions that from a philosophical basis, we definitely see ourselves in a lot of conversations nowadays. But understanding ultimately the nature and the black and white nature and defining it to sovereignty is critical as part of that process too.
Excellent. So as we keep going down the security topic, so the Sounds Institute, also 2024 research paper, looked at the instances of security events, security instances at companies, and differentiated those occurring at companies without an existing AI implementation and ones that do. And they found that the companies with an AI with an AI product was suffering 3.2 times the number of security instances, and a large percentage of them being kind of injections into prompts as they're doing various searches. So again, very interesting in terms of how AI is evolving the landscape of security threats. What are some kind of very AI specifically security threats that are, again, that could, or that you've seen or you have witnessed that organizations should think about, and that may come outside of the standard view of what is a threat?
I can give a very basic example of this, and I feel like it's just so obvious that we often overlook it, which is the right permissions. So when you create, now it's all agentic AI, but when you go in, you're creating the logic behind the AI solution, it's really important to give it access to the right data. And sometimes, and we've heard this anecdotally, we've heard that some AI, once it's set up, it's not set up with the right permissions. And so a colleague, we mentioned PII before, a colleague will go in as an example and say, I want to, check my pay stub. Like, they don't know what they can put in as a prompt. So can you tell me what I got paid in December 31st of last year, whatever the case is? And there's somebody with a very similar name in their system, and they don't realize that the permissions have not been set up correctly, and it pulls the wrong data. I mean, obviously that should be something that's very high up on the list of security. But what I'm saying is that it's as simple as prompting. You put in a request to access information, the security administrative rights or the permissions are not set up correctly, and bam, you have access to information on somebody's SharePoint that you should never have had access to.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And so data is protected, let's say legally, as a trade secret. And how you protect that, just like the Coca-Cola trade secret, there's like 3 or 4 people within the organization that ever get access to it. And then when things become digital, they're a lot harder to control. That's right. And like you'll have a non-disclosure agreement, terms of confidentiality, but it's all about what the policies and practices that you put in place, and really the locks on the door and the cybersecurity side of things. And so Like I think of it from the trade secret best practices and how you manage those. But it accelerates so quickly once things are digital, and then you get those, like it's just like having a house that has just so many holes in it. There's going to become people coming in and understanding what is a priority, what are the rooms that really need to be locked down, the proprietary algorithms, that personal information and that data, and then how you build the technology that's able to access that and get that. But it really goes to as simple as saying these are the things that are extremely valuable. We need to make sure that they're only accessible to a certain group, and then it starts to extend down from there and knowing what is valuable. But it's a challenge.
But it's also, it's not even just the accessibility to human beings. It's also the accessibility you're giving it to other AI systems.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what you're getting to. It's the intersection of other AI solutions that can make it difficult to control.
Yeah.
You know, you got one system talking to another system, and all of a sudden, you know, AI's accessing data it shouldn't, and then copying it. We all saw the I think it was the OpenAI report, but it's very interesting stuff, and it's not an overnight thing. Even though the hype makes you believe that you can turn AI on in an organization very quickly, this is what 50 years in the making. So,
yeah. I think to that, one thing that comes to mind for me that is often a blind spot for businesses is as you're going through project in AI, you'll often get to ask yourself the question about accesses. Same thing when you have big data projects in the cloud. One blind spot a lot of businesses have is around all the filing system that has grown over decades. And just thinking of these old habits of nesting files, and if they're out of sight, I'm the only one that knows it's there, so I'd only have access to it. Now with the venue of the productivity tools, those files, if they don't have necessarily the right sensitivity markers on them, could be easily accessible through AI. So it's important to go on both sides, is making sure the systems are configured so they access the right things, but also is making sure that the file system that the business is operating on is also properly coded for access through sensitivity markers.
Excellent. So kind of wrapping up this discussion, I have one more question, and it is a philosophical question and maybe a challenging question. So again, caveat with that, this is an opinion, and this is, you know, just from as a leader, just thinking this problem through. But because AI kind of takes the human decision making out of it, and AI is the system, if something were to go wrong, if a security breach were to happen, if someone's data is compromised, whose responsibility is it? Is it the developer who wrote the algorithm? Is it the algorithm itself that has evolved out of control? Is it the government, which has not done a good job of regulating? Is it the CEO of the company that, you know, is responsible for the product? Who is to blame? Don't everybody jump on this.
I think there's no answer I can provide that's black and white. But what I will say is when we've seen some of the initial adoption of AI and some of the hiccups sometimes or stumbling blocks, it's very much about the time spent on user testing, making sure that one group is not necessarily doing things without the support of another group. So giving an example, a group that's very technical supporting a group that may be working in engineering, but may not know their practice, and then now applying AI towards the engineering practice, that can create a lot of disruption because, again, you're creating results that aren't actually governed and fine-tuned in a way that's actually representative of the answers it should provide. So if we don't spend a lot more time on that side, then it becomes very tough to ultimately drive responsible AI adoption too. And that's the other side too, is making sure that when it comes to ethical AI and how it's adopted, it's not just policies regarding technology. It's about the fact that it's applicable to all suites of the business, business stakeholders, IT, but it's comprehensive. You don't just simply think about it as a technology tool. You think about it, you consider it from the process and from the people standpoint too.
Yeah, and to me, it's data governance and how you build that within an institution or organization. And I think it's to a certain extent shared responsibility. And shared responsibility sometimes mean that some people don't take responsibility within that. But certainly the sort of engineering ethics need to be there. You don't want to build a bridge that is going to fail. And so the technology people really need to understand how that's being used, the people adopting it, but ultimately somebody at really from the corporate level, the C-suite needs to be answerable to these things and understand the technology, know how it's being used, to be able to put those guardrails in place. But everybody's got to sort of be part of that.
I agree. I don't think it's a black and white response. And I would also echo, Jim, what you're saying around shared responsibility. Tal, when you gave that list, I was going through my head, I'm like, who are we gonna place blame on? It's everyone. It's the people, it's the users of the system, those who design the systems, those who implement the systems, those who purchase the systems. It's everybody's responsibility to ensure that we are acting responsibly with that information. There's also the flip side of that coin, and I'll be really quick, but the flip side of that is we also must accept a certain amount of risk with AI. And we know that there's going to be, and I think this goes back to your comments earlier around transparency and ethics and lawfulness and all these different things, having a responsible AI framework in place. And yes, as well, enforced with policy is important. But a guiding light or parameters to work safely within supports that a lot, because I think everybody is responsible for ensuring that the data is safe. It doesn't matter who you are or how you apply that. It's everybody's responsibility. But without a responsible AI framework or something similar, it's difficult for non-technical people to understand how to act responsibly.
I also want to add one point here, which is that the other flip side too is when we can turn this question around is who would be the ones getting credit for when AI does go well with an organization. When we look at the statistics, right, that we're behind from a study basis, then it's also an opportunity for people to also step up and say, like, you know, as part of that change, I was part of that group that actually initiated something that was meaningful and likewise created not productivity per se. I think we'll dig into that a little bit later, but more about the happiness of the organization.
Sentiment, yeah. Great.
And keeping the human in the loop. I think this goes without saying when it comes down to having responsible AI.
Always human oversight.
Yes, and this is the perfect segue. It's not going to be noted any better. So obviously, the human factor is a huge factor in the movement of AI. So we heard earlier, 51% of companies is really putting the onus on the individual to develop their own skills. And then if you look at training data, so we see that 54% of Canadian institutions have formal AI training programs. So those two statistics clearly correlate with each other. And we also hear that from a leadership perspective, only 43% of Canadian organizations say AI has had an effect on how the leadership team operates today. So clearly there is a gap in between kind of a human resources challenge between what companies are doing to develop their talent versus what companies need in terms of embracing the AI revolution. So working that into kind of our first question, so wanting to move beyond that narrative of AI is going to replace jobs or it's going to replace workers. What is the most surprising way that you have seen AI shape the work landscape or shape how we do work today?
I've got a story here, actually. Maybe I can kick things off. So I was working with a city a couple years ago, and they were trying to figure out how do we adopt AI in a way that's meaningful, secure, and likewise embraces the workforce all the way across their departments. So they engaged in a workshop, and they're creating things within 2 days. This group was presenting, and they actually their title was an arts and society team. Essentially, the people that provide statistical data to support or likewise review certain policies that are made from like a leadership standpoint to impact citizens. So this group had actually never touched necessarily a database. Most of them had worked with Excel, and when these things come where a request comes in, it takes they probably have around 2 to 3 weeks to actually produce a result of some sort. And as you can imagine, data, the lack of bias in data is critical to that process. What they did was they actually ingested 600 survey results from citizens around the idea of accessibility. And this data that is not necessarily quantified, transactional or likewise 1 and 2s. It's sentiment data. It's, citizens responding back and actually telling you in full sentences, this is how we feel. They've actually plugged into AI, and from there, the AI tool actually provided some interesting findings. Number one, that from citizen standpoint, one of the findings was maybe the city should actually spend more time actually working at other cities in addition to what they're doing right now, which was meaningful, but they citizens wanted to find out how other cities were dealing with it as well. And when that happened, actually, the leader of the organization went up and came back and actually told everyone, this is impactful. This is taking a team that doesn't necessarily has exposed or likewise feel the need to adopt technology as much, but they were able to find value from it and change the way in which we also articulate information. It's not about like getting the answer, it's about the type of information that it does provide. So that was a really meaningful one, and that also expands about other use cases, such as imagine if you could use AI to reduce high impact sites on injury sites within cities. Those are the types of ones that we've seen really advance over the last couple of years, and that's the kind of impact it can make when it's governed and likewise implemented properly.
For me, I think, we hear a lot that fear, or I think it's suspected that there's this fear around the adoption of AI. If I adopt it, how much quicker am I going to be replaced? If I don't adopt it, how much quicker am I going to be replaced? And there's this, this back and forth with workers not understanding exactly, how AI is going to impact the work that they do. And I think that's the responsibility of the organization to make sure they're articulating that properly. But one of the coolest things that I found in this kind of AI journey, through the role that I do even, is how soft skills are no longer soft skills. How creativity and communication and strategic judgment and strategic thinking, critical thinking, collaboration, all of these things that were before were kind of like, if you do these hard skills, have these technical skills, and then the rest of this stuff is good too. That has now become where you need to focus on AI skilling. It's not just technical skills, it's not hard stuff. AI skilling is beyond that, and that is such a cool thing to experience. And the way we kind of look at it, the way I think about kind of skilling is, first of all, if you implement AI right, your job will change. That's the point. That's the point. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean your employability has to change. And I think that's where organizations can really do a better job, is to say, yeah, your role's going to change. We need to re-architect that, but we're gonna put you somewhere else. You shared earlier, Tal, the statistics around one of the 4 pillars around, one of them was mobility. And the way I look at it is, we first build capacity. So take those skills take those tasks nobody likes to do, and automate that through AI. The second is building capabilities. This is where you really double down on that AI skilling, not only how to use the tools properly, but also all of these other quote unquote soft skills, and really boosting that, allowing people to be creative. And then the third piece is the mobility. What do we do next? And how do we have new job creation in those areas where those high value tasks that we really want people focusing on, relationship management and all of these different things, where we can now have like such an enriched bench of talent because you've taken the time to go through those steps. I think one of the pitfalls of this AI hype is that organizations, and I know we're going to get to this, but organizations, they skip. They go right to, I want to reduce because I've gained this efficiency. But there's steps to the moon here.
I work in a highly unionized environment, right, where with customers that have a lot of unions and such, and I think you hit on a lot of great points here. One of the things that I think sometimes we don't do and have a good job on is measuring and defining what productivity means. We all know that as a nation we have to be more productive, but productivity doesn't begin by simply implementing a tool. That doesn't change the behavior of a person per se. What can is ultimately how happy they're doing their jobs. Right? The jobs don't necessarily have to change in terms of job description, but if we could even make, let's say, a call center a person taking a call and likewise making it feel less redundant, making it feel like they were adding more value to citizens or to the people they're calling in, how much would that actually motivate them to actually likewise help more people? And how much would actually make a base calling in increase that base of callers, or likewise meet their expectations and also questions too? So really, I think sometimes it doesn't have to be scary. The impact of it is about, but it's also not about a tool. It's not about picking the right tool per se. It's about making sure you understand how to harness the process.
Yeah, so one thing I'd love to just rebound on is that topic of value around, that fear of like workforce reduction. One thing I've observed serving small and medium businesses recently is because right now when their reality is they're operating very lean, their mind goes immediately to adding value with AI. Not they don't have enough workforce right now. Probably also don't necessarily always have the means to get additional workforce to get to everything they need to do. So their story around AI is a lot of a positive one around adding value, and then invite larger enterprise to think that way as well, because with that and mobility of workforce, there's ways to make sure that AI is not necessarily a story of replacing people, but rather a story of making sure your company just has the ability to add more value with AI, do more, and then get the people to operate more on value added activity rather than those mundane tasks day in, day out.
Yeah, so I mean, I can share some data that back this up. So MIT did a survey around kind of employee morale and kind of concerns around AI replacement. And they found that prior to a new AI implementation, and they surveyed the field, they found that 63% of the colleagues in the field had significant concerns about role replacement or anxiety around their career futures. Then they were able to put in a strong change management plan, draw out how the roles would move around and what the changes will be. And at the end of that change management cycle, they're able to bring that anxiety down to 23%. So I think, again, having a real change management strategy, understanding, clearly communicating your plan. We always talk about the fear of the unknown. I think one of the biggest issues with AI today is if you don't communicate, if you don't tell people what your plan is, then they can only take the worst possible interpretation of what the plan is, unless you read the communication.
Yeah,
yes, good.
Yeah, and this is something like my background is in manufacturing, and so steel parts getting assembled, and so automation technology has been really a way of life for the last 125 years, right? Everything you had a steel press, and there was a lot of manual work there, and then as the machines got better, then robotic welding and all of these things, and then even now you have quality tools, you have material handling that is done by automated systems. Like the forklift isn't operated by a person anymore. Sometimes in these warehouses, it's operated by the machine as well as AI when they're navigating those environments. And so it really is about shifting from this, okay, we need to be the one that's moving the steel part or moving the data from here to there in the sort of software world, to being, we need to be the ones that are creating that technology. We own that technology. And so I work for innovative firms in the manufacturing space, the automation space, and they're the ones that control the software tools that get in there and add that productivity. It can replace people, the quality can go up, the health and safety can be significantly improved because people are not put in those situations. And so it's about being the ones that are developing that technology, owning that technology, and capturing the value from that piece of the value chain. So it's really moving up the value chain and being prepared for that.
Absolutely. Again, we faced this challenge numerous times before, and I think sometimes because you cannot see what things look like on the other end, I think, again, that kind of the fear of the unknown is something that we humans are genetically, predisposed to be in fear about.
I also want to also stress that we as vendors and service providers of any sort, from consulting to, I mean, this is my own personal perspective, from consulting to technologies, we also have that has a responsibility to be ethical and to provide and ensure that anything we do from a use case, from like a delivery of a service standpoint, meets that expectations. I'll give an example. We actually had one use case where information is going to be published on a website, and we actually held that back because we felt it could actually have a human harm in terms of how maybe people could interact with their benefits, for instance, right? So these are the kind of things that it's a responsibility by us too, to make sure that we're not just saying yes to everything, and we need to make sure that people are aware of the the concerns, have those addressed, and likewise get that perspective of how we would also implement those processes to in a transparent fashion. So doing it, I mean, we want to go faster, but we can't skip steps along the way. It's about making sure each of those steps are more regimented, but they still exist.
Okay, so I think let's move on to the other half of the discussion, which is really more about upscaling and improving the skill set. So so PwC did a great study called the Workforce Transformation Study, where they looked at companies that actively put in an AI upskilling program. And they discovered that typically the cost of an AI transformation program is not as great as what many companies think it is. The average cost is between $4,000 and $8,000 USD to upscale a colleague into an AI readiness role. And they found that 78% of those colleagues were then able to go into a role that had an AI component 12 months after the training. So there's certainly, keenly a great deal of value to this upscaling. So, I asked the panel, from your experience, how should companies go about this upscaling journey? What are some of the key metrics that they can kind of look at for success?
Well, I mean, I think I know I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think that this is truly where organizations need to make their workers, their workforce feel like they're being invested in. And it starts with if you already have AI tools deployed in the business, you must properly train those workers to use those tools. Because not only will you not achieve the success and the metrics that you're hoping to out of that, but the worker will feel more confident using AI. And as you continue, you mentioned change management before, as you continue to deploy new tools or all these different things, they grow with those technologies, which is really impactful for a human being. It's part of them. It's their twin, right? Their hip pocket. And I feel like this is kind of where you need to start with what are the basics? What are the foundational items that you need to train somebody on? Responsibility is a big one, right? Again, we talked about this earlier, but just like basic foundational AI skills kind of should be table stakes in any organization these days. It should be part of new joiners. It should be part of how you mentioned upskilling, but it's also reskilling. So how do you look at future leaders programs and how do you give them the right tools in order to accelerate down that career path? And I think that an approach that we took in the organization was a highly exploratory AI skilling program. So yes, there's stuff that you have to learn because it needs to be applied in the tools that you're using every day. But we also want you to explore, be creative, and experiment with other stuff. And we found a lot of success with that method. It's not as traditional as some of the other skilling programs, do this module, this module, this module. But we found that people are naturally curious and they want to explore that. And you talk a lot about human sentiment. And I think that when you make it accessibility, when you make that training available and leaders give the room for their employees, their staff during their workday to upskill themselves, that's the key to success. It's not an off the desk thing, built into what they're doing every single day.
I also think building upon your points there, when we initially saw skilling, it was often about tools, about how to use and how to prompt and how to actually just interact with set tools. And we have seen a shift in terms of training into more persona-driven training, meaning that we have to treat people from different roles within an organization differently on how they would use AI and how it's applicable towards them too. If we don't do that, then it simply becomes, when we look at even just like our phones nowadays, right? How long did it take before things like Instagram became that kind of like day-to-day kind of interaction? What justified it? And likewise, what actually encouraged it to do so, right? Making sure we understand those kind of driving behaviors and why it would be helpful for the habits you form are critical too. And that's the last part, is the habits. It's sometimes not necessarily about learning, it's putting in practice so that it becomes a rhythm. It becomes a day-to-day thing where you say, it actually did help me in this way. If it's not probably a habit, then it's tough because it simply feels like it's still that third-party thing that I can turn on every so often. Maybe it might help me. And
a bit kind of on the outside too, I'd encourage every business and leaders to embrace and the untapped learning that came from your shadow AI. I know a lot of the time that sounds like something you rather contain than just from a risk perspective, and that's valid too. But all those eager employees that went out of their way, found creative ways to make their day-to-day workflow more productive, faster, add value to it with AI, tap onto that, get that learning out, make it surface so you can share that learning more broadly to the rest of the organization. Because this one is very tailored, it's grassroots, it's tailored to what your business needs. So it's really key to understand what's being done so you can share it more broadly. And yeah, you making two things out of it, you can get also risk contained from what we talked earlier, like a privacy of information leaks and things like that. So look into that grassroots learning that is getting done in your enterprise. Yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to move on from the topic. We're going to move to the third area of discussion, which is the all-around AI policy and governance. So we've seen from the survey that Canada is, especially behind in the area of AI governance. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim. I know Jim has a couple of slides that he wants to share, and that's his area of expertise. Jim, over to you.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing these. And this is something I always like to point out is really the rise of the value of intangible assets. And so if you're thinking about policies, industrial policies from years ago, decades ago, you're probably talking about a lot of those tangible assets. But today, most of the value of companies are in their intangible assets, the IP, the data, the talent, the goodwill that companies have. And so as we were talking about just in the last discussion, talent is one of those key innovation assets that a company is going to have, and making sure that they're as high performing as possible, and leveraging the tools. And so we've shifted really from this knowledge-based economy, which is underpinned by IP, the data-driven economy underpinned by data, and now the economy really centered around machine knowledge capital. And so having these different layers of those intangible assets that a company is going to have, and the mix between different forms of IP. We talked about sort of the data and the trade secrets there, the IP, the patents, and I love this chart because it shows really how things have changed so significantly. And so 122,000 patents are being granted now, and probably more because of this data is always a little bit old. And so it's just this significant rise, and this goes to the economic impact of artificial intelligence. People are very covetous around this area, grabbing and filing and capturing new opportunities. And so firms that were able to get in early 5, 10, 15 years ago really have a strong position. And then lately it's really about customizing the AI and making it work for the companies. And then there is this really global perspective piece. Canada, we sort of think about the Hintons, no relation, although AI has told me that I'm related to Jeff Hinton, or we're actually the same. Is this a Google search told me that I was the same person? But we had these leaders with Bengio and Hinton, but in Canada, that's not transformed into the commercial side, and patents being just a representative piece of where the ownership lies. I was meeting with a Korean patent attorney yesterday, and Korea is just heads and shoulders above, or leading the pack when it comes to AI development and commercialization, and certainly with LG, Samsung, Hyundai, and those strong global companies. And then, of course, the US and China are leading as much as anybody else. And so it's really this geopolitical piece that is there, and the US with the presidential decrees around artificial intelligence and ensuring that US firms are baked into all of the global technology spots. And so we're seeing that play out across the board. And certainly, if you think about the top 20 patent filers in AI out of the universities, 15 are Chinese, and then the other 5 are US. And so that's an indication of where things are going and where more value is going to be created. And so a place like Canada, where we're really not even on the chart. It means that we need to sort of accelerate and move very quickly in this domain. And yeah, it's very geopolitical at this point too.
So, I mean, speaking about innovation, so obviously, when we see that Canada's not on the map, I think one, obviously, it's a wake-up call, but two, is also an opportunity. Because earlier we were talking about things like data sovereignty, we're talking about things like, our own control on our data. So, for any of the entrepreneurs listening today, there's clearly a huge opportunity in Canada to support our Canadian institutions, companies, government with AI in the future. So, we should be thinking about filing some patents and looking at where we can kind of leverage our own innovation. Historically, Canada has been an innovation hub in previous technology transitions, but in AI, it does not appear to be happening as of yet. So along that conversation of innovation, we're talking about AI policy. We talk about it as a negative, as companies not having an AI policy. Now, I actually have a very interesting, because I was doing some research on this, a very interesting study, again, another MIT study, where they looked at companies with governance frameworks. And they said, of course, it works because, 23% fewer AI-related incidences. They get things approved 31% faster from a regulatory perspective. But they also had longer AI development cycles, 18% longer AI development cycles. So, if 44% of companies don't have an AI policy, is there an advantage to not having an AI policy? And, how do you balance the control versus creativity discussion?
No,
you go ahead.
I think at the end of the day, you absolutely need a data governance strategy as an organization, regardless of whether AI is as a mandate or not. That will at least give you enough of a security and understanding of how to apply AI and do it in a way that's governed. Without that literacy in place, that understanding of the value of data and also where it's going, how it's interacted with, it's really, and then those are fundamental aspects and policies that would then influence the AI specifics. Where I think the AI specifics is more about how to actually categorize and create a success criteria of what AI projects to adopt and to evaluate. But all of that is fundamental relevant to an organization's data governance strategy.
Yeah, I think of the AI policy sort of in two groups. Sort of there's the public policy, and then there's the corporate policies. But to a certain extent, they're all a lot of the same pieces. What is valuable? How do we protect these things? And then when it comes to the public policy side of things, as well as corporate, it's like, what are our values? What's important to us? How do we want to ensure our democratic institutions have that? How do we want to manage social media? All these other big challenges that we're getting into. And then from a corporate perspective, you're thinking about those things as well as it impacts your customers and your value proposition. So there are, let's say, the best practices are still being synthesized. So there's a good role for standards here, and organizations sharing best practices and learning from each other. But it is still a lot of it is the know-how that is within an organization, and then building that capacity on data governance.
And I think that's a great point, which is like, this is not new per se in terms of some of the things around AI, right? Machine learning has been around for a long, long time. And when we look at actually the branch of the data science branch, AI and machine learning are branches within that categorization. So what's happened here is we've democratized how people interact with what typically required a lot more significant of an investment from an education standpoint, from a skilling standpoint. But the same principles or similar principles around machine learning can be applied. And a lot of organizations did have a significant investment in the machine learning side too.
Yeah, it's like you think about 100 years ago, people only a certain number of people knew how to drive a car, and then with everybody getting in and being able to drive, then you need those rules of the road. We're driving on the right side in this country, on the left, and this is how we're going to do. And now with vehicle charging and all this, so the rules of the road are still being written.
Yep.
And just like then, there were horses and there were everybody else on the street. So we still need to write those rules of the road, but we don't want to be running people over, and we need to be very careful about that too. Yeah.
But the concrete's been laid at least.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then it's better to start with something that will evolve with you. It will change. It's bound to happen. It's not the type of policy that you put out and then can be shelved and everyone read it and we're good to go. The AI one are bound to evolve because the road is paved, but there's always more things that are added to it, and it changed constantly. So it's one of those policy that it's better to get an early draft out that you will continue to iterate than wait to have a perfect draft that may never happen, because you're losing on that benefit of having guardrail for the people that are on the road right now in your company, whether they're on the shadow road, on the road that you paved. At least you're bringing a form of guardrail around how you want your privacy, your information, bias to be handled, your IP, and you can just iterate with it.
Yeah, there's an opportunity too, just like the car, you've got windshield wipers now, you've got seat belts, you've got all this airbags, the safety equipment, and so there is the industry that is being created here to create those tools to make it safer, make it more secure, better governance. And so in the like financial sector, like AML, anti-money laundering tools as a service, all of these other things. So it creates this, and that's why it's up and to the right. There's more and more opportunity as things get created, and there's going to be more and more tools, business models that can be built from that.
I think that metaphor, one thing I also highlight is it's important that you're not just building the trunk of a car, that you focus on the whole car and you're not just getting really excited about one particular aspect, because that is not going to allow the car to run, right? So, we have seen some cases where it's like, from a science experimentation basis, this is really exciting, but it's still at the end of the day a trunk and a component, and keeping that full vision. Maybe this is where leadership comes in.
Yeah, and I've seen old patents where there's like a windmill on top of a car, and that's how it's going to be powered, like it was almost like a sailboat. And so there's a lot of those things that are going to get wrong, and not be holistic. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I think we're coming to the end of our kind of preset questions and preset portion of the discussion. So next up, we're going to open up the floor for questions from all of you guys who are watching and listening. So we have Hamza, who's going to be facilitating the Q&A, and we're going to turn it over to you, Hamza, for some questions.
Let's do it. Thank you for a great panel, all our speakers. And so, Tal, the first question from you comes from Gareth. With AI creeping into tech stack, I know that Megan, you were talking about this. How can companies best govern that?
Anybody else want to take it? I'll take it if not. Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is, or what I've seen is that it goes back to basics for us. It's cracking open those contracts. It's looking at the data privacy and all of those different pieces with your vendors. What we find most often is you're sitting on 10-year-old evergreen contracts that haven't been updated with new regulation and all these other things. So I think the very first thing you need to do is do something like that. Is go back and review so you know where you're starting from. I think that's just probably the best practice in general, to kind of go back and review those contracts. But now more than ever, that's really important, particularly as it relates to data. Data is the new currency, right? And so we really want to make sure that we understand where that's going. So I would say absolutely that's the first place to go. And then you've touched on it so often, is around the data governance. You must have a strong data governance process. So procurement and data need to be like in lockstep when it comes to these. And don't be afraid to ask your vendors as well. Yeah. Like building really robust questionnaires or updating. This is, we talked about a little bit policy there, but I think it's applicable in this question. This is the opportunity to go and update those policies, update those governance models. You don't have to create something from scratch. Particularly in countries like Canada, where there's a little bit more lenient regulation or the absence of regulation around AI, this is the opportunity to go in and make those little adjustments, including procurement standards. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, and it's like a make versus buy, and then from a company perspective, being careful about what you agree to. So if you're planning to replace this, you can replace it both from a legal perspective, and a lot of them are easy enough. It's sort of 30 days, and you can do it. But then from a technology perspective, once you get sort of in and started and the ball's rolling, and if your plan is to remove that and start doing something else or change the value chain and where you're positioned in it, then having that flexibility. And so some things may cost more, but give you the flexibility to be able to move and adopt.
And defining as you,
go ahead.
As you manage your tech stack, what you gonna do through your platform versus where you're going to invest to either build or get the best of breed software, and being very deliberate about that, because you want to make sure as well as you get through those contracts that you get the most out of the things you buy. Like every platform are coming with their own AI features now. So before moving to a different one, it's really key to define upfront what you're going to get out of the platform, because that's just part of the commodity you want to get out of that platform. And there's no sense on bringing something custom to the table and bringing that investment, or even going out there and buy the best of breed tool for it. So being very deliberate on what goes where in your procurement cycle.
I think it goes back also to Megan's point around data governance is like, so for organizations that have a very refined operation around how applications and tools can be connected, just bear in mind that those connections are still logical and physical. We have a thing in Azure called private endpoints. So when theoretically you have set up that network, that governance configuration and policies around it, people cannot accidentally turn on a generative AI tool and then just plug it into another tool. So that security, that layer is something that literacy is important and becomes ever more critical right now. But generative AI creep in terms of its way of just naturally creating tools, it shouldn't occur if the people have been skilled enough, and likewise the policies have been set in place.
I think the bottom line is this is not going to happen organically. This is something that you need to do as part of your strategy, and that this perhaps is one component of the larger strategy. Is you got to do that discovery. And I think that's a great point around maximizing your investments in the contracts that you build. Hey, this is an opportunity to make sure that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, but doing it in a way that is enforceable by governance.
Hamza, I think we can take another question.
Great. Yeah, just maybe 2 or 3 more here. This one comes from Lisa. Any trend on verticals or industries or types of companies that are likely to train their employees in AI versus those who leave it to the employees to upskill themselves?
I'll start. So
Yeah.
obviously, again, not a plug, because obviously we offer training. I think again, it has to do with a lot to do with the nature of the company and how integrated is technology to the core identity of the company. Companies that are tech natives are much more likely to embrace AI training, and many of them have started, even pre kind of the newest Gen AI wave, let's say, right? And then you can see the cascading of adoption, then followed by larger companies that have significant IT presences, like your banks, insurance companies will then follow suit because they have a large component of their operation rooted in technology in order for them to function. They may not be tech native, but the technology is portion of the function. And then unfortunately, SME companies that, quite frankly, are actually the lifeblood of Canada, but the majority of Canadian companies are SMEs. Those are the companies that typically are going to be late adopters, or are the ones that do have a tendency to leave it up to the kind of the desk level to do their training. At least that's what we see.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more my personal view and some of the research I've done independently, but I think that there's quite a few organizations or industries out there that are highly competitive, really low margin business. They're more likely to be looking for efficiencies and productivity gains and all the things we can't yet measure in any concrete way. But I would imagine those would be kind of highly impacted by formalized training programs. I would think that they would be. Even call centers and things like that, where you're looking at these kind of high worker volume type industry. I would imagine that these organizations should be quicker, not only to implement AI, but to be training on the usage of that as well.
Maybe one thing, this is personal as well. From personal experience, Duolingo is an application I use every day, and I love languages. I love learning new things, right? But it's one thing where they were very public with their declaration of like infusing AI into their processes and the way they provide training and the curriculum. The other side is like Shopify, which is like a local Canadian company, right? that was also very public in terms of how they're investing in generative AI. So maybe one of the areas I would put forward is consumer services, right? As an industry, it's doing more and scaling up to interact and likewise make more of an impact to the consumers they serve.
So Hamza, I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah, I think Hamza had to restart his laptop test, so I'll take this one here. With AI adoption, do you foresee an increase in demand on AI governance and ethics by Canadian organizations in the next few years?
Was the question, are we going to see an increase in governance?
Yes. Do you foresee an increase in demand on AI governance and ethics by Canadian organizations in the next few years?
I think absolutely. I think absolutely. And part of it is, the companies that adopt policies that have the courage, let's say, to take and to put their policies out there, are the ones that get to lead what those policies might look like. So you definitely have kind of a first step advantage, to dictate the pace, and also a market perception advantage as somebody who's doing the right things in AI.
Yeah, and it's a pretty well white space. There's a lot of these rules left to be defined. And when I think about data governance, data value, there are not a global set of norms around these things yet. And so if you come out, you have the technology, you've implemented it, and you're in the market, then you have a strong leadership position to be able to say, okay, these are going to be the best practices around data governance. And it really is, you need to be a leading company, a leading technology company that's part of that value chain, controlling that value chain and then you can really dictate and put your thumbs on the scale and say, okay, this is what's going to work from a data governance perspective for our business model, and then have that be pushed down and then shared. Whereas if you're a receiver of the technology, it's going to be a lot harder to be able to dictate how data is going to be governed.
I think it definitely increases, and likewise, I also want to reiterate that the intention here is not to say that a recommendation by any of us is to just put in AI just because AI exists today, right? The whole intention is if something takes you, like for instance, 12 steps to do today, and it could reduce it to 2 or 1. Those are some of the great kind of value that you will find from AI, but it shouldn't be where it's 2 steps and now it creates an additional step for you to actually follow through. So as you think about reinforcing and likewise spending more time around the governance of AI, it's also critical that you don't over pivot when it's not necessary to your processes and people too.
Yeah, I mean, your greatest superpower as a leader in an organization is to decide where you edit, where AI doesn't belong.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't belong everywhere. And the sad reality is a lot of organizations are finding out the hard way. And so to kind of come back full circle to answer this question as well is, in the absence of policy or standards or principles or wherever you kind of framework you start at, you don't want this to become a necessity because of an incident that happens. So getting ahead of it and learning best practices, model countries, things like that. And I think, Kim, you mentioned it earlier, which was starting somewhere, get a draft out, start working, talk to policymakers. This is a good way for organizations to kind of beat the rush.
Perfect is the enemy of good. Just get going and iterate as you go. It's better to be out there now with something that you'll improve than even wait another month or week to draft something and get going.
Can't enforce what doesn't exist.
So, okay, well, thank you very much, our esteemed panelists. So once again, Kim St. George from Collective AI.
Thank you.
Megan Wickens from SparkAI, Alex Chen from Microsoft Azure, and Jim Hinton from Own Innovation. Thank you very much for attending and being part of our event. You will be able to find everyone's social media and LinkedIn connected. Please reach out and connect with our panelists if you have any additional questions. Would also love to acknowledge the sponsors, Collective AI, as well as Akkodis Canada for sponsoring this lovely event. So again, some key takeaways, about what we discussed today. We started with talking about data security. And you know, we really it was stressed throughout the conversation that data is the currency, data is the key thing that we must make sure you have the correct policy in managing. Then we talked about kind of the human capital side of it, getting beyond the conversation about AI, you know, replaces all jobs. What do we do, you know, from a, you know, moving forward perspective, how to integrate those two things together. And we finished with a talk around policy and how we're going to be able to shape and make Canada more of a competitor in this space. So again, quick recap, follow-up resources. There's going to be a toolkit shared. Again, a lot of the studies that I quoted and talked about, and also the study from Akkodis is going to be published and you guys can access. Again, there'll be a QR code for making the future work for everyone from Adecco as well that you guys will be able to download. And then we wanted to, you know, thank everybody actually on the call for attending. So thank you very much, everybody. Until next time.
Thank
Over
you.
and out.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to our speakers and for all our attendees. If, like Tom mentioned, if there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll keep them in mind and keep you in touch. And on behalf of the board, Akkodis, and the Collective AI, thank you again and have a wonderful rest of your day.